The fleeing shadows, the galaxy was burning. Civilizations that once thrived under bright suns were reduced to drifting ruins and silent ash. In the great void, whispers carried faster than light, warnings spoken in desperate tones. A predator had awakened, something so vast and merciless that entire empires collapsed without a chance to resist. This enemy was known only as the Swarm, endless and hungering, leaving nothing but silence behind. The smaller races were the first to fall. Colonies burned. Refugee ships scattered. Planets that had once been centers of trade became graveyards. Among the broken survivors was a convoy of fragile ships, holding families, leaders, and what little hope they could carry. They had no weapons strong enough to fight. Their shields were weak, their engines barely faster than the approaching storm. To the frightened survivors, it felt like running through a forest filled with predators. Any shadow could be the end dot in their desperation. They searched for safe havens. Yet every star system they reached was already under attack or abandoned. They needed strength. They needed monsters of their own. That was when they heard the old forbidden tales of humans. The stories were not like the legends of gentle protectors. Humans were spoken of as a deathworld species, born on a planet of storms, beasts, and endless dangers. A race that did not simply adapt to their harsh world, but thrived in it. Other aliens called them unpredictable, violent, and terrifying. Humanity had once walked among the stars, but after ancient wars and endless battles, their fleets had vanished into the dark. Few believed they still existed. For most, humans were a warning. Do not awaken the monsters that choose to sleep. But now, with the swarm chasing them, the refugees faced a cruel choice: search for myths or accept extinction. Their leaders debated. Some feared humans would destroy them as easily as the swarm. Others believed monsters were the only answer to greater monsters. At last, desperation won. They set their course for the black regions of space, where no sane empire dared to travel. Days turned into weeks. Supplies ran thin. The youngest cried with hunger, while the elders whispered prayers to stars that know. Longer listened. At last, their ships reached a sector shrouded in silence. No signals, no stations. Just the drifting echoes of abandoned wars. It felt like entering a tomb. Many feared they had wasted their last chance on a ghost story. Then, the sensor screamed. Shadows appeared on the edge of the void, vast, jagged shapes gliding from the darkness. Not polished ships of empire, not graceful cruisers of diplomacy. These vessels looked like beasts forged for war itself. Black armor scarred with old battles, hulls patched with steel upon steel. Their engines burned like furious suns, and their weapons seemed endless. They did not look like a fleet built for defense, but for the sole purpose of survival through destruction. The alien refugees trembled. For a moment, they believed the swarm had reached them. But the ships bore no mark of the enemy. Instead, they carried a simple insignia burned deep into their metal. The crest of Earth, the emblem of humanity. The refugees tried to speak, but their signals were drowned in static. Then a human voice cut across their comms rough, commanding, filled with the weight of countless battles. It did not ask for names or reasons. It asked only one thing. Why have you come to Deathworld space? The refugees hesitated. This was the moment. They were prey standing before predators. With trembling voices, their leader begged for mercy, speaking of the swarm, of the destruction, of their need for safety. Silence followed. A silence so heavy, it felt like the void itself had paused to listen. At last, the human voice returned, colder than before. You seek safety among monsters. Do you even know what that means? The refugees exchanged terrified glances. They had come searching for saviors, but now it felt like stepping into the den of beasts. Yet what choice did they have? Behind them waited the swarm. Before them, stood humanity's deathworld fleet. And in that moment, as the dark warships closed around them, the aliens realized a chilling truth sometimes. Survival demanded at one place hope not in the gentle, but in the terrifying. The humans had been found. Whether this would mean safety or destruction, none could tell. But one thing was certain. The monsters of legend were very real, and they were watching. Asterisk into the teeth of the beasts, the refugee fleet drifted in silence, surrounded by human warships that looked more like predators than machines. Each vessel carried scars of old battles, not polished away, but left as reminders. To the aliens, it felt as if the ships themselves were glaring at them, daring them to move. The humans had not opened fire, but the tension was crushing, like standing at the edge of a cliff where a single wrong step meant falling into darkness. The human voice returned, deeper now, more controlled. You came into our space. Few dare. Most who tried before you never left again. So tell us, why should we let you breathe? The alien leader's words shook as he spoke. He told of the swarm, of how entire worlds were falling. He described how they had no weapons, no allies left, and no hope. He spoke of children crying in hunger, of families who had lost everything. He begged not for conquest, but for a place to live, even if it meant serving the humans in whatever way they demanded. Another silence followed. Then, slowly, the human warships shifted. Their weapons remained aimed, but the fleet opened a path. A dark corridor of steel giants leading deeper into the void. The voice spoke again. Follow. But know this, you are entering deathworld space. We are not saviors. We are survival. The refugee ships obeyed. Engines hummed weakly as they drifted through the corridor of human warships. Every alien eye watched in awe and fear. Some whispered that they had found demons, not protectors. Others wept quietly, thankful that the humans had not destroyed them instantly. Still, no one felt safe. Soon they entered the core of the human fleet. Dozens, then hundreds of ships emerged from the dark battleships, carriers, frigates, dreadnoughts, each scarred, patched, and bristling with weaponry. The size of the fleet was beyond anything the refugees imagined. Empires they once knew could never have built such a war machine. This was not just a navy. It was a moving fortress, a beast of metal and fire that had lived through endless wars and refused to die. On the largest ship, transmissions finally opened. The humans revealed themselves, not through polished diplomats or soft voices, but through hardened officers whose faces carried the weight of survival. They wore armor as if peace were a forgotten dream. Their eyes were sharp, their movements deliberate, their presence commanding. One human stepped forward on the screen, calm yet cold. You ask for safety? There is none. Not here, not in this galaxy. But if you remain, you will learn what it means to fight. We do not give sanctuary. We give weapons, training, and war. If you cannot live with that, you will not live at all. The alien leader faltered. They had come hoping for protection, perhaps kindness. Instead, they found a challenge. The humans were offering survival, but not freely. It came at a cost. The refugees would need to fight to become more than they had ever been. As fear spread among the refugees, a loud alarm suddenly blared across the human fleet. Red lights flared, sirens echoed. The human officer turned sharply, listening to reports from unseen voices. His expression hardened. Then he looked back at the refugees with words that froze their hearts. The swarm has entered the sector. The refugee ships trembled. Their nightmare had caught up to them. Sensors screamed warnings as hundreds of red signals appeared on the edges of the void. The swarm was here vast, endless, moving like a tide of living death. The aliens panicked, shouting in fear, but the humans did not. Their officers moved with precision, their ships shifting into battle formation with the grace of predators preparing for a kill. The officer's voice returned, calm yet filled with steel. "So, refugees, you came to us seeking safety among monsters. Now you will see what it means. Watch closely. This is how humanity survives." The dark fleet roared to life. Engines burned, weapons unlocked. Massive cannons swiveled toward the incoming swarm, and as the enemy poured from the void like a flood, humanity's deathworld fleet moved not to run, not to hide, but to meet the storm head-on. For the first time, the refugees saw not myths, not rumors, but the truth of humanity. These were not gentle guardians. They were predators forged in fire, standing unbroken against extinction itself. And as the first human warships opened fire, tearing into the swarm with devastating fury, the refugees realized they had not found sanctuary. They had found the only. Monsters in the galaxy terrifying enough to face greater monsters without fear. Asterisk the deathworld roar. Void erupted with fire. The first line of human warships opened fire in a storm of light and steel. Cannons spat slugs the size of buildings. Railguns screamed, and beams cut through the blackness like burning suns. Missiles streaked in packs, weaving paths of death before striking into the swarm of living ships. Each explosion tore holes in the endless tide, yet more poured in. The battlefield was chaos, but the humans fought with a rhythm, a terrifying order born not of peace, but of endless practice in survival. The refugees huddled in silence, their own ships powerless to aid. Their fragile hulls would shatter in seconds if they entered the fight. All they could do was watch as humanity unleashed its fury. Fear turned to awe as they realized this was not defense. This was a hunt. The swarm pressed forward, filling the void with bodies. They were endless, grotesque things, living ships of flesh and armor, shrieking across the void, weapons built from bone and acid. They came like locusts, blackening the stars. Any normal fleet would already be crushed, but the humans did not bend. They surged forward. They rammed into the enemy lines. They fought as if death itself were only another enemy to be slain. On the refugee bridge, the alien leader whispered in disbelief. "They are not afraid, not even now." The officer on the human screen gave a grim smile as though hearing. "Fear is for the weak. Survival is for those who earn it." A dreadnought. At the front charged its main cannon. Energy built until its entire hull glowed red-hot. Then it fired. A single beam ripped through the swarm line, burning dozens of creatures into dust. The shockwave shook even the refugee ships, though they were far behind. The aliens gasped. To them, it was as if the humans carried the power of stars in their hands, but the swarm did not break. For every creature killed, more appeared. They swarmed the sides, flanking, trying to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers. One human cruiser vanished in an explosion, consumed by acid fire and tearing claws. The refugees cried out in horror, expecting retreat. But instead of running, the humans roared louder. "Seal the line! Push them back!" Voices barked across combs. The fleet shifted instantly, ships filling the gap left by their fallen ally. Weapons doubled their fire, missiles swarmed like hives of their own, and boarding torpedoes slammed into the enemy, carrying human soldiers into the belly of beasts. The battle was not only outside, it was within. Humans fought face to face. Inside the swarm creatures, tearing through flesh and bone with rifles and blades, the aliens trembled. They could hardly imagine such courage or such madness. To them, war was something fought with distance, with safety, with walls. But the humans leapt into the mouths of monsters and fought from inside their throats. The enemy tide kept pressing. A massive swarm beast, larger than a city, emerged from the void. Its body was armored in bone plates, its weapons spitting rivers of acid that melted even human steel. The refugees screamed in despair. This was doom itself, unstoppable. But the humans answered not with fear, but with unity. Dozens of ships turned at once, unleashing every weapon they had. Railguns shattered bone. Beams seared through flesh. Missiles tore deep craters in its body. The giant roared, lashing out, destroying 2 human ships. But the humans did not stop. They hurled themselves at it again and again, until finally, under the combined assault, the monster broke apart in a blinding explosion of fire and gore. The void shook. Silence followed for a moment, filled only by static. Then the officers. Voice returned, calm and iron. This is what it means to stand in deathworld space. The swarm is endless, yes, but so are we. We are not civilized. We are not gentle. We are survivors. And survivors do not fall. The aliens wept, not from fear this time, but from something they could not name. Relief? Awe? Terror? They had. Thought humans were myths, shadows of old wars. But here they saw the truth. Humanity was not just alive. Humanity was the wall against extinction itself. The swarm retreated, broken, leaving debris and burning bodies adrift in the void. The humans did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply returned to formation, scarred but unbowed, already preparing for the next battle. The refugees realized then they had not been given safety. They had been given a chance to stand among monsters, and maybe, if they learned, to become something more than prey themselves. Asterisk, the price of survival. The battlefield was quiet now, though wreckage drifted in the dark like broken bones. The humans had driven the swarm back, but not destroyed it. The refugees sat in stunned silence, staring at the giant ships around them. For the first time since their worlds had fallen, they felt a small spark of hope. But it was hope wrapped in fear, because they now understood why humans were called monsters. Their leader requested communication again, voice trembling with both gratitude and dread. You saved us. We owe you our lives. We cannot thank you enough. The human officer appeared once more on the screen, his armor smeared with the dust of battle, his eyes cold and steady. He did not smile. He did not soften his words. Do not mistake what you saw. We did not save you. We fought for our survival, as we always do. You happened to be in our shadow? That is all. The alien leader bowed his head. Then let us remain in your shadow. Give us a place. We have children, families. We will serve you. We will obey. Please, let us stay. The officer leaned forward, his voice sharp. Serve? Obey? Do you think survival is given like charity? This is not sanctuary. This is deathworld space. You live here. You fight here. You earn survival with blood, sweat, and fire. If you cannot, then you will not remain. Do you understand? The words fell like thunder. The refugees exchanged fearful glances. They had come hoping for protection, but instead they had found a demand. The humans were not guardians. They were teachers of war, whether one wanted to. Learn or not, one alien, younger, and the rest spoke from the back. But we are weak. We cannot fight as you do. We have no weapons, no soldiers. The officer's eyes narrowed. Weakness is a choice. We were not born strong. We were born fragile, in storms and beasts that wanted us dead. We learned to fight, because we had no other path. You will do the same, or you will die like all the others. To prove his point, the humans broadcasted recordings of their history. Images filled the refugee screens, ancient battles on Earth, humanity facing disasters, wars where humans fought even when outnumbered, scenes of them rising from the ashes again and again. Their history was not peace. It was struggle. Always struggle. The refugees watched, horrified and inspired. They had thought humans were monsters because they were cruel. But now they saw humans were monsters because they refused to bow to anything, even extinction itself. The officer spoke again. We will not shield you like children. We will make you stronger. Your ships will be rebuilt. Your people will be trained. You will fight beside us. And when the swarm comes again, and it will, you will stand, or you will fall. Silence followed. The refugees' leader felt the weight of the choice pressing down on him. If they refused, the humans would cast them back into the void where the swarm waited. If they agreed, they would be forced into a life they had never known, a life of battle, of fear, of constant struggle. Finally, the leader nodded, voice steady for the first time. Then teach us. We will learn. We will fight. Whatever it takes. We will not be prey again. For a long moment, the officer studied him. Then, slowly, he gave the smallest nod of approval. Good. The first lesson begins now. The human fleet moved, guiding the refugee convoy deeper into their space. Massive docks opened, drawing the broken alien ships inside. Human engineers swarmed over them like ants, tearing apart weak hulls, reforging them with steel and fire. Weapons were welded onto frames that had never known war. Shields were strengthened, engines rebuilt. The refugees' ships were no longer helpless transports. They were becoming war machines. At the same time, human soldiers entered the refugee ships. They did not bring comfort. They brought drills, orders, and weapons. They showed the refugees how to hold rifles, how to aim, how to survive in combat. There was no patience for weakness. Mistakes were punished, but progress was rewarded. Slowly, painfully, the refugees began to learn. For the first time in their lives, the aliens felt the weight of a weapon in their hands, not as a symbol of violence, but as a promise that they would never again run helplessly from the dark. The humans called it training. The refugees called it transformation. And as the days passed, they realized something frightening yet powerful. The longer they stayed among the deathworld fleet, the less they felt like prey. They were becoming something else. Asterisk baptism by fire. Days passed in a blur of drills, repairs, and harsh orders. The refugees were no longer allowed to sit helpless inside their ships. Humans marched them into training halls, forced weapons into their trembling hands, and demanded they fight against drones and simulations. Mistakes were punished with bruises, exhaustion, or shame. But slowly, painfully, the weak began to harden. Refugees had never held rifles before. Their bodies ached from endless practice. But as days turned into weeks, something began to shift. Their voices no longer trembled when shouting commands. Their hands no longer shook when aiming. They started to understand what the humans meant. Survival was not given. It was earned. But training was only the beginning. The humans had prepared them for something more. The warning came during a routine drill. Sirens howled through the halls. Red lights bathed the decks in an eerie glow. Voices shouted over comms. Contact! The swarm is here. Fear gripped the refugees like chains. Their leader rushed to the command bridge, where humans were already taking positions. The officer's face appeared on every screen, calm as ever. You wanted survival. Now you will earn it. The swarm has found you, not us. They are targeting your ships first. Either you fight or you die. We will not shield you. The words struck like thunder. The swarm was coming for them directly. For the first time, the humans were not the shield. They were forcing the refugees to stand. Their ships were still clumsy, newly reinforced, their weapons barely tested. Panic spread among crews. But the officer's voice cut through the noise like steel. This is your moment. Take your weapons. Man your stations. Fire, even if your hands shake. You are no longer prey, unless you choose to be. The swarm appeared, countless creatures spilling from the void, drawn to the weakness of the alien convoy. Their jaws glowed with acid, their claws scraped across the emptiness of space. The refugees screamed, but then their new weapons fired. First volleys were wild, missing targets, striking only shadows. But then, with human officers shouting orders through comms, the fire grew steadier. Beams cut across the void, slugs tore through wings, missiles detonated in the middle of enemy packs. For the first time in their lives, the refugees were not running. They were fighting back. It was chaos. Some of their ships shook violently under the assault. One vessel cracked open, spilling bodies into the void. Yet even as fear rose, something stronger began to burn anger. The aliens remembered the worlds they had lost, the families devoured, the screams of their children. And in that anger, they fought harder. A refugee ship scored its first kill. A swarm beast shattered under railgun fire. Shears erupted on their deck, sharp and desperate. Another ship followed, tearing apart two smaller creatures with missiles. What had begun as trembling fear turned into fire in their veins, but the swarm pressed harder. A massive beast lunged at one of the refugee ships, jaws wide. Before it could strike, a human battleship intercepted, slamming into it with a barrage of weapons. The monster exploded, and the human officer's voice filled the comms. Good. Now stand with us. Do not falter. Side by side, humans and refugees fought. The humans unleashed disciplined fury, carving through the tide with precision. The refugees fought with desperation, messy but fierce. Together, their firepower cut into the swarm until the creatures, sensing the tide shifting, pulled back into the dark. The battlefield fell silent. The void was littered with burning corpses of the swarm and shattered wreckage. The refugee ships floated scarred but alive. For the first time, they had survived not by hiding, but by fighting. On their bridges, silence turned into disbelief, then into quiet pride. They were bloodied, terrified, but alive. And alive because they had stood, not cowered. The officer's face returned, eyes hard but carrying a faint trace of respect. You see now. You are not helpless. You can fight. This was your baptism. By fire. Remember this feeling? Hold on to it. Because the swarm will come again, and next time, you will not have the chance to tremble first. The refugees nodded, their fear no longer the same. They had stepped into the storm, and though they were still weak, they had not broken. For the first time, they truly believed what the humans had told them: monsters were not born. Monsters were made, and they were beginning to become something more than prey. Forged in fire. The silence after the battle was heavier than the fight itself. The refugees drifted among the wreckage of destroyed swarm ships, their own hulls scarred and blackened. But this silence was different from the silences they had known before. It was not filled with helpless fear. It was filled with the pounding realization that they had fought, and they had lived. For days after, their people worked side by side with the humans. Engineers patched ships, soldiers drilled harder, captains learned how to read tactical maps with human officers guiding them. It was no longer training for survival. It was preparation for war. The refugees began to change. Their voices grew louder when giving orders, their hands steadier when carrying rifles, their eyes sharper when looking into the void. They were no longer the same trembling people who had begged for safety. They were beginning to feel the weight of steel in their hearts. Still, doubts remained. In the quiet moments, the refugees whispered among themselves. Some feared they were becoming something terrible, losing the innocence of who they once were. Others argued they had no choice, that innocence had died when the swarm devoured their homes. And a few, quietly but honestly, admitted they felt stronger now, Proud in a way they never imagined before. The humans did not speak of pride. They spoke only of survival. Their officers drove the refugees harder each day, forcing them into leave fire. Drills, ambush simulations, and brutal endurance tests. Mistakes were punished with harsh words, but never cruelty. The humans were not trying to break them, they were trying to mold them. The refugee leader watched all this with conflicted eyes. He remembered the fear of first contact, when the human fleet had looked like demons rising from the void. Now, after weeks of fighting beside them, he understood. They were not demons. They were survivors shaped by endless storms. And now, they were shaping the refugees into the same. Then the warning came again. Scouts reported a massive swarm force gathering on the edges of deathworld space. Not a raiding pack, not a small tide, but an invasion wave, larger than anything the humans had shown them before. The message was clear. The swarm had marked this sector, and they meant to burn it clean. The human officer summoned the refugee. Leaders. His voice carried the weight of storms. This will not be a skirmish. This will be war. If you wish to remain, you will fight as part of the line. You will not hide behind us. You will not run. This is the test. Stand with us or leave now and be swallowed. The refugee leader trembled. For a moment, the old fear clawed at his heart. But then he looked at his people, scarred but standing taller than before, and he realized something. They were no longer prey. They could not return to running. They had already begun to change, and there was no going back. He lifted his voice. We will fight. We will not run again. The officer gave the faintest nod. Good. Then prepare yourselves. The swarm will not wait. The fleet moved into formation. The humans placed the refugee ships among their own, not hidden at the back, but woven into the line, trusted to hold. It was both an honor and a terrifying responsibility. As the hours ticked down, the refugees prepared in silence. Weapons were loaded, crews strapped into harnesses. Families whispered final words to each other, unsure if they would live to speak again. The void itself seemed to hold its breath. When the invasion wave finally arrived, it was like watching a storm made of nightmares. The swarm filled the stars, a black tide stretching beyond sight. Their roars carried through the void, echoing like thunder. The refugees froze for a heartbeat, but then their weapons powered on. Their crews shouted commands, and their ships locked into formation beside the humans. The officer's voice came across every channel, calm and steady, like the eye of the storm. Remember what you've learned. Do not fear. Do not falter. You are no longer prey. You are part of the Deathworld fleet now. Stand, and the swarm will break against us. Engines roared, cannons armed, missiles locked. The line of steel and fire was ready, and as the tide of the swarm crashed toward them, the refugees felt something. Strange fear, yes, but also pride. They were standing among monsters now, and they were no longer afraid to become monsters themselves. Rise of the new monsters, the swarm descended like a living storm. Thousands of monstrous ships poured from the void, blotting out the stars. Their screeches filled the coms, a sound of endless hunger. To the refugees, it was the same terror that had haunted them since their first worlds burned. But this time, something was different. They were not running. They were standing in the line, weapons ready, humanity's war fleet beside them. The first wave struck like thunder. Acid beams lanced through the dark. Claws raked against shields, and the void filled with fire. The humans answered with disciplined fury, unleashing storms of railgun fire, missile barrages, and cutting beams. Entire sections of the swarm burned to ash, but more pressed in. The humans did not break formation. Neither, this time, did the refugees. Their ships trembled under the assault, but they fired back. Weapons they had barely learned to use spat fire into the tide. Their railguns tore holes through smaller swarm beasts. Their missiles detonated in clusters, shredding wings and armor. They shouted, not in panic, but in defiance. One refugee ship was surrounded, dragged down by 3 swarm beasts clawing at its hull. In the past, the others would have watched in despair. But now, 2 allied ships broke formation, charging to its aid. Together, they unleashed everything they had, tearing the attackers apart and dragging their wounded ally back into the line. Cheers echoed through combs. They had saved one of their own not by running, but by fighting. The human officer's voice cut through the chaos. Good. You are learning. Hold your ground. Strike as one. The battle raged on. Swarm giants, vast as cities, hurled themselves into the line. Human dreadnoughts met them head-on, weapons tearing flesh, while refugee ships circled like wolves, striking at exposed wounds. For every loss, they struck back harder. For every ship that fell, another stood taller. The tide was no longer one dash-sided dot, and then came the heart of the swarm. A massive beast, larger than any seen before, emerged from the void. Its body was wrapped in bone armor, thicker than any fortress, its maw glowing with the power to melt entire. Fleets. Fear surged through the refugees as its shadow swallowed them whole. The humans did not falter. The officer gave a single command. All ships, strike. The fleet surged forward. Humans and refugees alike poured fire into the giant. Shields cracked, hulls split, and the void burned with explosions. Refugee ships struck first, railguns hammering at its armor. Missiles from their decks tore deep wounds. Then human battleships followed, unleashing their dread cannons in a storm of blinding light. The beast roared, lashing out. A refugee ship was torn apart, its crew vanishing into fire. Another was crippled, its engines dead. But instead of despair, the refugees screamed in rage and fired harder. They had lost too much already. They would not lose everything again. Finally, the combined fury of humans and refugees shattered the beast's core. It erupted in a titanic explosion, its body tearing apart and scattering into the void. The blast shook the battlefield, sending shockwaves through every ship. For a moment, the void went silent. Then the swarm broke. Their endless tide faltered, scattered, and fled into the blackness of space. The survivors vanished, retreating. From the monsters they could not devour. The battlefield was theirs. Humanity's fleet stood, scarred but unbroken. Refugee ships floated among them, battered but alive. The refugees stared at the wreckage of the enemy, hardly believing what they had done. For the first time, they had not just survived, they had won. The officer appeared on their screens once more. His eyes were cold, but there was respect in his voice. You stood. You fought. You bled. You are no longer prey. You are no longer weak. You are part of the deathworld fleet now. The refugees bowed their heads, not in fear, but in pride. They had sought safety among monsters. Instead, they had been forced to become monsters themselves. And now, they understood monsters were. What the galaxy needed to survive. As the fleet turned and moved back into the dark, the refugees felt something new in their hearts. Not only fear, not only gratitude, but strength. They were no longer a broken people hiding behind others. They were warriors now, part of a legend that the galaxy feared. Humanity had taken them into the fire, and in that fire, they had been reborn. The Deathworld fleet sailed on, carrying not just humanity, but new allies forged in war. Together, they were no longer hunted. Together, they were the hunters. And for the first time, the refugees whispered the words with pride. We are monsters now.